next guests that are going to be discussing trade in Wisconsin farms. When Paul put together this panel, just come up. When Paul put this panel together, his number one goal was trying to see what are Wisconsin's advantages. We talk in big phrases about what's happening with beef consumption, what's happening with tariffs, all those big pictures that really we hear about in the news, but we can't necessarily get our arms around within Wisconsin. So that is the charge of this next panel. Talk a little bit about, does Wisconsin have an ace in the hole anywhere? What have we learned? Where are we going? How do those relationships matter? And this is really going to be a great panel. Some have lived through this over and over again. It's for some like a recurring nightmare. For others, it's strengthened them. So let me introduce you from my left, your right, on the far end. Brian Hoskins is the Senior Vice President of Ag Banking and Ag Banking Manager for Nicolet National Bank. Next to him, my friend Will Sue, President of Sue's Ginseng Enterprises. John Schutzke's right there next to him, one of our, I always say farm safety specialists because the rest of the title is too long, John. I don't like that. I'm going to write a note. And then my buddy Kelly Wilford. We aren't going to hear much from Kelly because Kelly is an attorney and she will not give me 30-second bites. It's like a minute and a half because she feels responsible. But she does
working on it.
She's a fantastic resource that now has been snagged by University Extension as our farm law outreach specialist. And we will be allowing questions, hopefully, at the end of this session. So if something strikes a nerve, there's something that you're really gunned up about hearing on, let's make sure that you're jotting those down as we get going. So let's start with the big question here then, folks. What is Wisconsin's advantage? I know where I want to start because he's lived it, he's watched this, storytelling, relationships, and I'm just gonna kind of pick to get us started, and that's Will. Will and I have done, I swear we've had this conversation, buddy, for before the pandemic. 7 years. I think Will and we did a similar panel up in Wausau, and I kid you not, the next week is when the pandemic literally became reality. You had just gotten back from a trip to China, and it was like, bam, the next week, the world started shutting down. And that also became a part of your world as our ginseng coordinator, literally, in the state of Wisconsin. What is Wisconsin's advantage, Will? What have you learned since that date? Now here we are, the next iteration, tariffs and trade. I'm going to give you the floor to get us started on what is Wisconsin's advantage, if any? Louder?
Hello? There we go. Okay. So for those of you that don't know, Wisconsin is the leading producer and exporter of ginseng from the United States. We are now globally probably one of the smallest producing regions. Canada and China are growing this species in their own countries for, in Canada's case, export primarily, and then in China for domestic consumption. Wisconsin has been known for our flavor and taste and unique qualities of the ginseng, very similar to Napa Valley, since the late 1800s, early 1900s. So this has been an over 100-year journey that Wisconsin ginseng has been on. The last time we had this type of trade disruption was World War II, because when Japan started taking over parts of China and colonizing parts of Asia, it shut down the trade of ginseng from Wisconsin to China, and farmers in central Wisconsin stored the product for years, basically the entire post-war period until, the entire interwar period until the trade was opened back up after World War II. So we've seen this before. It's just that most of us haven't lived it. And so farmers are now living it where, as recently as last year, we were sitting on a year or up to 2 years worth of crop and storing it. And so you talk about cash flow crunch, you're also talking about a crop that takes 4 or 5 years to reach maturity. So once you harvest and you have a crop, you have to keep planting and keep the expenses and keep maintaining the crop, and then once you harvest, you keep storing it until you're able to sell it. That glut is starting to diminish now as people have found ways around the tariffs. The tariffs are still there. In 2018, the tariff rate was about 33 to 35%. It got as high as 45% at the end of the first Trump administration, and now importers into China are getting a 10% relief on that 45%, so it's back down to the mid to low 30s, but that tariff is still there. People are finding ways around it, and as a result of this, prices have dropped roughly 30 to 40% from 2018, and the number of farmers growing ginseng in central Wisconsin has also dropped 30 to 40%. So to give you some perspective, when I returned to Wisconsin in 2011, there were about 200 to 250 ginseng farmers in central Wisconsin. Today, there are now fewer than 70. And our expectation is those numbers will continue to drop. The poundage has dropped as well, from probably 1.5 million pounds a year in 2011 to more recently around 1 million pounds. So we've lost also about 50% of our output as those numbers of farmers have dropped. So as you guys have seen in other industries, you have some consolidation. The bigger farmers are getting bigger. The smaller farmers that can't scale or don't want to scale or can't transition are exiting. But our issue is this crop has always been, for the last 125 years, an export-driven crop. If you don't have access to China, you don't have access to 90+% of your consumers, because 90+% of the ginseng grown in Wisconsin is exported to China, Hong Kong, Taiwan. And if you can't get into those three countries that I call Greater China, being of Taiwanese descent, you don't have a market.
Now, let me ask you then, how are you pivoting to try to keep things going? You mentioned those three outliers that are trying to get the product in, and focus on your relationships, Will, because that's something that I find incredibly unique and very powerful about how you go about selling. Do you still kick it old school where they want to see the crop, they want to come to Wisconsin and see it, even if they can't afford it?
Yeah. So on the crop side and on the sales side, we're one of the unique crops where the processor basically comes to Wisconsin to grade the crop and purchase it directly from the farmer. So I typically act as the broker in some of those cases and assure the creditworthiness of the purchaser and guarantee the payment to the farmer from foreign sources of funds. So this is a really interesting crop because the money comes in typically from those Asian countries, comes into central Wisconsin, and then is dispersed directly to the farmer. So the only other intermediary is the receiving bank or my receiving bank or the broker's receiving bank that then transfers it to the farmer, and it's all direct payment. And so they still come, they still shop. During COVID, we did it via cell phone and video and picture, but this is still an organoleptic crop. You want to taste it, you want to smell it, you want to see it. And so we used to send samples, et cetera, during COVID, which would get delayed because of supply chain disruptions. Now we do have people returning to market, but you have some transition in generation and technology. So people are now more used to buying ginseng via digital means because of COVID. But I would equate it to buying a house. Like, it's all dependent on like how comfortable you're buying a house, because most of my large customers are buying a 40-foot container, which is about 30,000 pounds of ginseng, which would have a commercial value of about $1 million. So if you're okay buying a house for $1 million using Zillow.com and never actually stepping foot into the house, I highly encourage you to get into ginseng purchasing. If you aren't comfortable buying a house on Zillow.com or some similar website, sight unseen for $500,000 or $1 million, you may want to come and actually inspect the place. And so that's what we have. We do have folks coming back, but they also run into issues such as getting into the country and other barriers to trade, and then exporting the product, obviously, because there's still a tariff into China. So a lot of them are going to secondary markets where they are further processing the product, such as Southeast Asia or Taiwan or other countries.
Is our quality still superior?
Our quality is still superior. We are the highest premium. We trade at about 2x the multiple, especially depending on the exchange rate. So we're double the price of Canadian, and we're 4 times the price of Chinese grown. And so we are still the premium product, but because we're a premium product and priced higher, as the Chinese consumer does what many Americans are doing, costs go up, they trade into lower priced and lower cost products, because they believe that saving money may be more important than the quality of the product they're purchasing.
Sure.
And they know the U.S. goods are better.
All right, we're going to push pause there, and that's a lot to think about, but if you didn't know anything about ginseng, that's the guy that can educate you in short fashion. Let's continue this conversation, though, about where is Wisconsin's strong suit. You see quality, relationships, transparency, and bringing that outside market to central Wisconsin. I'm going to move to Will's left, and talk to Brian. Brian Hoskins, again, Senior Vice President, Ag Banking Manager with Nicolet National Bank. So I want to hit you up here, Brian, on that relationship factor. Before we got up here, Brian and I were talking about, and you know this to be true, farmers' relationships, the tightest relationships they have are pretty well represented up here. It's their attorney, it's their banker, it's their accountant, that type of thing. And those trusted relationships are incredibly important when you're in uncertain times. So let's talk just a little bit about the conversations you're having now, Brian. And do the growers, no matter what they're, whether it's beef, whether it's row crops, whether it's dairy, do they feel confident? Do they feel like they're still at an advantage in America's dairy land? Are they feeling pretty confident now on beef on dairy? What are you hearing on these conversations, and now is the time when you're having the most of them? Give me your perspective. Does Wisconsin still have that infrastructure, the confidence, the esprit de corps to carry ourselves into the market?
All right, thanks, Pam. There were quite a few questions in there, but happy to be here and get started.
Pull the mic closer to you, buddy. I'll come down and do it for you, but then...
All right. How's that today? Is that a little better? Better. All right. Appreciate that and the handful of questions in the introduction, Pam. Just a little bit of background. Nicolet Bank, we are approaching about $2 billion worth of farm loans. Most of that's in Wisconsin, and about 3/4 of that is dairy. So I probably have a little bit of a dairy focus on my customer contact and experiences here. That's been a little bit of a highlight right now as we talked about the different commodities this morning and the little more bleak outlook in the crop world today. But dairy's had 5 pretty solid years, so a lot of our dairy producers have pretty good liquidity going into a little bit of a downturn from a pricing standpoint right now. So those are some of the highlights. The beef world, obviously that was the most exciting talk this morning. That's been an extreme highlight in the U.S. in the last year or two here. Beef on dairy is becoming very common. You talked about some of these conversations and what are we seeing with producers. On the beef on dairy, for example, there's sort of, two schools. There are some people that have adapted and really pursued that. The difference in income we're seeing right now on farms that have been very aggressive, have a lot of beef cross terminal calves that are being born. I think that was our dairy slides talked about the dollars of beef revenue per hundredweight. I think we're seeing that definitely compared to a few years ago where that was less than $2 a hundredweight. A lot of farms will average at least over $2, but the high end will be $5. So when we're talking about the difference in revenue and difference in profit potential on farms, that is one of the things that sort of intensified that difference. There's farms that are really, really performing well and excelling, and there are farms that maybe were a little late to adapt, maybe timed an expansion where they didn't have a lot of beef calves or a lot of those opportunities. That has not been a tailwind for every farm out there in the state. In terms of processing capacity, we've had a few larger expansions. Wisconsin is still a great place to be from a milk producing, milk processing standpoint. Basis compared to where it was, the difference between our board prices and what the local processors are paying, that's been fairly strong in the Midwest. That's been very strong in 24 and 25 relative to some of the struggles in the early 2020s. So we've seen nice improvement there. Again, listening to all the different speakers this morning, definitely feel like the dairy and beef are more of a highlight, but we, I guess on the negative news side, as we're looking at class 3 prices in the mid-16s range, 10-year average is mid-17s. And I challenge producers in a talk or a meeting like this, like to bring up, are there other expenses you can think of, input costs, that have gone down in the last decade? There aren't a lot. So while we're looking at lower than average prices by 5, 8, 9%, that in and of itself maybe isn't terrible. The profit margin with that decline in pay price is pretty significant.
One question for you, because you're in Cow Alley. Let's face it, something that we
That's probably still fair.
Something that we sometimes take for granted is Wisconsin's infrastructure. Now, to Howard and Randy's point, maybe some of its aging needs some maintenance. But I stop and think about how far milk's going to have to go to Kansas, and how far milk's going to have to go to get to capacity in some of these new plants. And then I look at Wisconsin, where I still see milk trucks passing each other. You know what I mean? Is that still viewed as an advantage to Wisconsin? Now we're talking Great Lakes. Is that still an advantage? Are we glossed over because we've had it around for so long? What's your perspective as an ag lender that's looking at the health of the industry in our borders?
I would say that's still an advantage in Wisconsin, and it seems like there are several different cheesemakers and processors represented here today, which is great to see. One of the things, while much of Wisconsin's milk is made into cheese, there are a number of different cheese processors, specialty cheeses. There are a lot of different end users. So there's a little bit of a built-in buffer. If something falls a little bit out of popularity, we are very, very fortunate with the diversity of the cheese makers and other milk processors we have in the state.
Well, and if they want it in Michigan or Minnesota, we'll let them have it if we've got it to spare. But yeah, that's like I said, sometimes we look past the benefits that we've got. What we're talking about here is also these conversations that are happening with trusted sources, and we've discussed it already. Randy brought it up, and I believe we heard it in the morning. There's a palpable sense of anxiety, right? It really doesn't matter. Even the beef producers are a little jittery because, oh, what if this shoe drops? So everybody in agriculture right now, the unknown, the uncertainty, that's why John is up here. For years now, John has made it his quest, especially I remember during the pandemic, to try to help people tie a knot and hang on, for lack of a better phrase. Here's the resources that are there. Here's the things to think about. Here's the observations you should pay attention to people around you. And again, the Wisconsin Farm Center, but even resources like yourself, John, I think that's a benefit for Wisconsin that we hold uniquely, because there are not many of you like that around the country.
Yeah, I was not sure when I heard Will and our other speakers talk about the opportunities. One of the things that is positive, let me first of all say, farming is stressful. I don't have to tell you all that. It's obviously why I'm up here on the panel. You know, you could measure that. I think Senator Kajewski talked a little bit about suicide rates. And if you look just at the stressors, it's all the stuff, right? Weather, markets, uncertainty, tariffs, we're working in this biological space with animal disease and all these kinds of things. But one of the things I want to say is Wisconsin really has been a lead in this area, and I give a lot of credit across administrations. It's not just been the most recent. To the Farm Center, we're doing a lot of really great work. I work with Illinois, Iowa, a little bit with Purdue, and they all look up here at our voucher program through the Farm Center. It's a really special thing, and we are the only state that provides these sort of wraparound opportunities. Pam, just kind of going back to your the way you framed the question, you said the beef guys can still be stressed. So farming is stressful, even during times when we're making boatloads of money, which I don't know how often that's really happened in my career, but even when you're making money hand over fist or you have that opportunity, there's still so much coming at you. And the thing that I think about is if I find out as a producer that for whatever reason, we're going to have a big chunk of that sort of family living expense taken out of our budget, people figure that out. We're problem solvers. We can cut some expenses here and there if we're going to be down $60,000 or $40,000. The problem now is this volatility. And it's just, it was talked about over and over this morning, the wild and crazy. You wake up some morning and you think this is going to have not a $60,000, but a $600,000 impact on our bottom line. And if I could just say one other quick thing, I think it's important to note this stress stuff is real. When we are under stress, there's chemical impacts on our body. We have adrenaline that shoots up. That's why my pulse right now is probably about 110, whatever. Our blood pressure goes up. We have difficulty sleeping and those kinds of things. It's adrenaline. It's also a chemical that you've all probably heard about called cortisol. So cortisol does the same thing, except cortisol also deadens, or it doesn't deaden, it numbs the frontal part of your brain. And that's the part of your brain that is responsible for making decisions, right? You've got to make a decision. You've got to weigh the pros and cons. You've got to evaluate different production alternatives. So we're suddenly flooded with all these stress hormones because of all this crazy volatility. We make bad decisions because we're not thinking straight. and then it just becomes a vicious cycle. The bad decision leads to more stress, difficulty sleeping. I just made myself a note. Right now, it's like we're driving 120 miles an hour. Many people feel that way on a country road that's twisting and turning, and we don't have our headlights on, and we're accelerating into the curve. And that's the thing that I think about, where people need to sort of step back. And I'm gonna pause there. Maybe we could come back. There's a lot of resources out there, but that's the time when we need to think about connecting and reaching out and building relationships, not just with the farm center, but with friends and family and neighbors and other people.
Yep, very good. And we will come back to that, no doubt. Don't forget, we're going to give you an opportunity for questions regardless. I'm just leading them down a path. You may want to take the conversation in a different direction, and we'll allow for that. Now, Kelly, I'm going to give you the floor. And there's a couple different things that crossed my mind. Obviously, I want you to introduce yourself and your credentials for those of you in the audience that don't know Kelly. And then let's think a little bit about that uncertainty. I'm sure that you had the questions. We had this conversation months ago. All of a sudden, the federal government has frozen grants and stopped funding, and oh my God, I was supposed to have EQIP money. I had a project that was supposed to go through on conservation. I was supposed to be, and that amplified the anxiety John described that weather and markets had already created. So that may be addressing how you walk people through it, what kind of contractual agreements you coach them up on, and then, kind of where we're going from here. Another obstacle that's making the news all over the place is our labor situation. Now our hearts bleed not only for our margins, but also for the people that we depend on. So introduce yourself to the audience and then take it where you will, my dear. If I feel like you're going long, you'll know it.
Okay, thank you, Pam, and thank you, everyone. Like Pam said, my name is Kelly Wilfert. I currently serve UW-Madison Division of Extension as the state's farm law outreach specialist. I'm actually an attorney as well. I left private practice about 2.5 years ago to join Extension, recognizing that we have a shortage of attorneys here in the state of Wisconsin. And so what my role really does is strive to help do outreach and education to our farmers so that they understand not everything. They're not going to know every deadline, every quirk of what they're filing or might need to file, but I want them to know when they have options to take action, when they have options that are going to support them, especially in times like this. And so a lot of my work focuses around that. In particular, as we talk about the stress that comes with financial distress, I've been trying to do a lot of outreach around what do I want to know as a farmer if my check suddenly stops coming, my check bounces, I find out that my processor is filing bankruptcy. Some of you may be familiar with, is it Hanson Mueller out in Nebraska that filed bankruptcy earlier in the year? Hopefully that's not impacting our farms here, but could it happen here? Yeah. And, we've seen the Del Monte bankruptcy filing. We saw the Pure Prairie poultry situation, Hastings Creamery. There have been a variety of situations where, from time to time, unfortunately, not every business goes as planned. And so as the farmer, what happens when your check suddenly stops coming? And what we always want farmers to know is that you have options. One of the strengths, I would say, of Wisconsin and of agriculture in general is that both state and federal government have taken action to ensure that there are some backstops here. They're not going to solve every problem, and I'm going to talk about them in sort of two veins, pre-bankruptcy and once a bankruptcy filing occurs. And then at some point we can maybe circle and talk about bankruptcy on the farm too. We'll cover all the fun things today. But I really encourage farmers before they're in that extreme stress moment to know if something happens and my check doesn't come, who am I going to call? How quickly do I need to take action? And so I'm going to talk about if your processor files for bankruptcy first. There are two main backstops that I often think of at the federal government level. That would be the PACA Trust, the Perishable Ag Commodities Act Trust, and the Packers and Stockyards Trust. You might hear different names: Poultry Trust, Dealer Trust, Packer Trust, a couple different items here. Essentially, both of those programs serve as backstops in the event that processors buying those particular products file bankruptcy. So normally, if someone or a business files bankruptcy, what's going to happen is my friend Brian at the end, at the bank, is going to have a mortgage. He's what's known as a secured creditor. He's going to get paid first. Now, let's say that John has also decided he's going to be a hard money lender. He didn't take any collateral, but he handed out some money. He's what's known as an unsecured creditor. If there's anything left, maybe he'll get something, right? We're going to divide it. Well, how many of our farmers do you know are filing mortgages on, let's say processor property? Nobody, right? It's just not how the process works. However, our federal government, Congress recognized decades ago, and I shouldn't say decades for everyone, some of these are more recent developments in the last 6 or so years, but they recognize that we don't want to leave our farmers out in the cold. And so they set up these provisions that provide for, we call it a floating trust. And what it does is it says, hey, our farmers who are selling these particular products, they're going to get stepped up the line actually in front of the bank. We're going to make sure they get taken care of first. So with the Perishable Ag Commodities Act, that's our fresh fruits and vegetables, our folks that are selling those products. In a bankruptcy setting, if the processor files bankruptcy, those farmers have a PACA trust right or claim that they're going to get paid first, but they have to make that claim fairly quickly within, and I don't want to mess up the days, I believe it's within 30 days of not getting paid. It could be 15. Within 30 days of payment due if they didn't get paid, and then within 15 days of a dishonored payment. Pretty quickly, right? And in agriculture, this industry is somewhat of a handshake deal. Sometimes it doesn't feel good to, let's say, make a claim when, well, they just missed one, right? Or it just happened. I want to give them some time and see if they can get their feet under them. But we need to know that there are some pretty intense deadlines on that. The same thing is true when we talk about the poultry trust or the packer trust. Those are going to be for our livestock and our poultry birds. We're still under 30 and 15-day deadlines. And so it's really important that if you're missing a check, you're knowing how quickly do I have to move and what do I have to do in order to preserve this claim. Now, with those programs, it is going to be giving notice to the processor. You may also have to give notice to USDA, and then ultimately it proceeds through the bankruptcy. But there's a couple options that'll step in either pre-bankruptcy or a little bit quicker than the bankruptcy case might be. And here in Wisconsin, that is our Agricultural Producer Security Trust Funds administered by the Department of Ag, Trade, and Consumer Protection. So the Wisconsin legislature saw fit to provide some security for various growers. Now here in Wisconsin, it's going to be milk, vegetables, and grain primarily. And again, similar situation here. When there are payments that are not coming through or folks are defaulting, there are opportunities to reach out to DATCAP and make a claim, and those funds are available to help reimburse. Now, each program is a little bit different, but I will say the process for making a claim is pretty straightforward. It's a one-sheet piece of paper and proof that you were owed those dollars. In my opinion, pretty straightforward. Could be different for everyone. But again, we're on a tight timeline here to make sure that those claims are being filed in a timely manner. Again, typically within that 15 to 30 days. Check your specific program to be sure. Now, with the DATCAP program, they don't reimburse dollar for dollar 100%. Some programs are a percentage up to a certain dollar amount, some are a couple tiers. But I don't know about you, if my option is 0 or something, I'd rather get something. So what I'm not giving you today are all of the details. I'm not telling you every single step you need to take. But what you do want to know if you're a producer of one of those products, you want to know that these programs exist and that if you have a check that doesn't come through or a check that bounces from your processor, some of these protections are there in place to back you. And I actually pulled last night, I was curious, how often has the Producer Security Fund been used? And I noted that it's over 250 farms that have received payments from that since its inception. The earliest one showing was 2005. Now, 250 farms maybe doesn't seem like a lot, but for those folks, I would be willing to bet it made a difference.
Yep. When was the last time that it got tapped in Wisconsin?
Ooh, last couple of years. I'm going to look at Randy and see if he remembers. Was it 24? Hastings, yeah.
Okay, yep. You know, that brings up a very good question. Well, maybe it's a good question. You'll decide. Conversations. You know, I started with Will because I'm intrigued about doing business the old school way. You're seriously going to fly from Hong Kong to central Wisconsin to look at a root plant or, you know, whatever. So that just kind of always sets me back. But that conversation, because Brian, I've seen you work in a room like at Dairy Strong or whatever, and you're talking to dairy processors as much as you are dairy farmers. John, to your point, I feel like I'm a victim, but do you know where your end product ends up? Where is it? Is it cheese? Is it dry? Is it fluid? Where is it going? And how are they doing on the bottom line? Did Dean Foods just make headlines today? Should I be investigating those kinds of things? And then to your point, Kelly, how do I take action or what do I do? They've got my stuff. I don't have any place else to go with it. Let's start that conversation. How do you coach them up, Brian? Do you ask your dairy producers to know where the end user is? Do you want to know? Do you investigate what? Because I know, like I said, you got Cow Alley, so milk can go a lot of different ways to a lot of different end users. And unfortunately, I say with love, many of my dairy producers are like, see ya, as soon as the truck's out of the driveway.
I think that's continuing to change over time. More producers are familiar with their processors' goals, their processors' end products. That's a good thing. We continue to encourage that. Some of the different events are, that are put together, whether that's DBA or a PDP. Lot of organizations that do help bring those producers and processors together, and there are relationships on farm with processors. Again, originally rooted in quality, have branched into a number of different things in recent years. Carbon footprint, sustainability, there are a lot of different things. A lot of processors are interested in some of the watershed groups and things that were talked about a little bit earlier today as well. So we continue to see that relationship grow every year, which is a good thing. Most recently, have overheard a whole lot of conversations, have had a bit of a dip in the price of fat lately. There are some milk processors that don't particularly need any more fat. Some of the conversations on that topic alone are, can we feed to not necessarily decrease total output, but to have a few more pounds, so our fat component percentage, a lot of that's attributed to great research, different things, genetic improvement in the dairy herd. That's great for efficiency, that's great for tons of things, unless it's bad for your processor. So those conversations are continuing to happen more, and there are a few processors that are being very open about it and what their options are for the extra fat, and it's been a general positive dialogue around that. Not that everybody that has a 4.5% fat limitation on their farm is happy about it, but it has been a generally positive dialogue. So.
Yeah. What about you, Will? Do you ever wave somebody off? Like you get a call from Taiwan and says, I'm going to send 6 guys or whatever to the farm, and you're like, yee.
We welcome them. So part of our business has also turned into agritourism now, actually, because we have customers, especially those who now live or reside in the United States, who are interested in our product and they want to come out to our farm and learn about it. So they fly into Chicago or Minneapolis, drive from all parts of the U.S., especially during the summer, and they bring their families out and have an experience kind of learning about Wisconsin ginseng in central Wisconsin. So we have moved a lot more towards tourism, and we have a lot of our vast majority of my staff speak Mandarin or Cantonese, which are the primary business languages that we use in China. So we all know farmers work a lot of hours. My hours tend to be at night when I'm communicating with the buyers and the customers in Asia. So technology helps a lot with that. I wouldn't be able to do it without translation apps and without things like WhatsApp and WeChat to be able to communicate with people overseas. But they come here, both tourists and our buyers. They spend time on our farms, meeting with farmers, doing deals. Handshake deals are most of them. We back you were talking about the kind of the credit worthiness. Those of us who broker, we're literally speaking on behalf of the buyer, saying their money is good. The checks are written on our accounts. They're cashed against our banks because we're expecting that those buyers, either when they receive the product or before the product leaves the U.S., will have paid us for those items. No different than you guys deliver your products to your processors as well. The difference is that we're the ones facilitating those payments, and we're the ones negotiating those deals to ensure that both buyer and seller are happy, because there's no grade. I mean, this isn't a commodity exchange traded product.
Right.
And so the individual buyer is determining the price based on their ability to resell it and make money on it. So it's a really interesting part of our kind of farm economy system. But I think it's really cool that you have all of these folks coming in who are interested in it and adding to the overall impact that Wisconsin ag has on the global economy.
Is there any kind of insurance that you guys can lean into? And then my second question, does Wisconsin look pretty compared to where they normally would get their ginseng?
Yeah, so the people like coming to Wisconsin because except when the buying season tends to be December and January after the crop is kind of put up for storage and they can look at 90+% of the availability. Everyone likes coming here in summer for the tourism, but when the buyers come, it's typically right around Thanksgiving or after hunting season by the time the product is dried because of our processing. So we harvest the roots in September, October. They go through a 2 to 3 week cure in coolers. And then after the curing process, it's another 2 to 3 weeks of low temp dry in kilns. So the total processing period after harvest is about 6 weeks. So when you're harvesting after Labor Day, your first crop is rolling out of the kilns mid-October, and the last of it sometimes is rolling out after Thanksgiving. So most of them come in December and January, so they're here to do business. There's not much else. They don't ski. They don't snowmobile. And so they come to Wisconsin and they either sit in the hotel or they sit in a restaurant or they're out on farms talking with the farmer or at, we have a couple of brokers and dealers who have centralized the collection of samples. And so it's really interesting if you walk into some of them in Marathon, Wisconsin, or at our offices in Wausau, we literally have buyers coming in from the Chinatowns, from overseas, and they're coming in and looking at sample boxes, 60 or 70 pound boxes representing 5, 10, up to 30,000 pound lots, and making purchase decisions from visual inspection of the root.
Insurance?
Insurance. Some farmers qualify for crop insurance, but when you're talking about a 4-year premium until it reaches harvest, it's a really expensive proposition. Most of the larger farmers who kind of know what they're doing, we take on all the risk and just hope that if we have a disaster year that we'll have a better future. But there was a snowstorm on Mother's Day weekend of 2010. That collapsed all of our shade cloth. There was a state emergency declared. Most of the farmers who did not go out and immediately try to fix things ended up going out of business because the insurance payments were not sufficient to keep them around. So that was when we lost a significant amount of our farmers, was after that disaster. And now with the prices being low because of the tariffs, a lot of the younger farmers are having a really hard time not only getting financing, but being able to make ends meet because they don't have sufficient acreage and the sufficient capital base because of their debt load to be able to continue production.
Yeah, and they got to wait it out for the crop.
Yeah, so we're losing a lot of our younger farmers.
I don't want to, I can keep this up, but the microphones are hot and ready to go if you've got questions. Of course you would, Shawnee. Right back there. We'll get him the microphone before the end of the day, I promise. John, we talk about these communication discussions. That's, I've known this guy. He's been my field man forever, but I'm hearing rumors at the coffee shop or the feed mill about, that's a tough spot to be in as the senior stakeholder of the farm. No, like Kelly said, they'd treat us well. They took care of us. That's not always the way to handle things these days.
Yeah, and I think, consistent with everything we've talked about, when I mentioned the 120 miles per hour on the curvy roads with your headlights off, the way to slow that down. I used to love watching Tom Brady. Tom Brady was the quarterback for the Patriots.
Yes, the GOAT.
Well, and then Tampa Bay, right? So he always would talk about, I slow the game down, and I think that's what we do. We have this tendency under the stress levels to like curl up. I'm being not quite literal here, but kind of curling up into a fetal position and checking out from the rest of the world, and that's when we need to be connecting, whether it's our attorney or the regional rep, understanding the industry, going to the annual, whether it's the Farmers Union or the Wisconsin Farm Bureau Federate or whatever your group is, to learn as much as about the industry rather than kind of taking that tendency to withdraw. I talked about the importance of reaching out to groups like the Farm Center. The other thing that I just think is important to mention, because we have these ag relationships, right? Whether it's Taiwan or processors or cheesemakers. The other relationship that we tend to underlook is our health professionals. And I speak to, and it tends to be guys, I just have to say this, it tends to be guys my age, like 55 on up. I'm actually 65, I'm not gonna hide behind that. But these guys that, like, you ask, when's the last time you saw a doctor? Like, you're telling me you're only sleeping 3 hours a night, you're constantly tired, you feel like the world is crushing down. And I say, when's the last time you saw a doctor? Well, I had a checkup or a physical 3 years ago. And if they're with their spouse, you see this. And it's like, well, no, it might have been like 6 or 7 or 8 years ago. So making sure, like, we've got all these resources in Wisconsin. We've got these communities. Our communities in rural areas are not what they used to be like when I was a kid. They're more spread out. But we do have opportunities to connect with people. And again, Pam, just being consistent with the theme, the relationship thing, it's not the time to check out, it's actually the time to reach out more and explore all of those different resources that you have access to.
Excellent. Sean?
You sure you want me to ask a question?
Well, come on.
No, thank you very much. My question for you is we've had lawmakers here and our state top ag official here. I have the honor to work in the state capitol every day, and Senator Markline is right. Now there's maybe 3 out of 132 lawmakers that are directly from the farm. 25 years ago, it was 35. We have a $116 billion industry. We're very good at talking to each other. Lawmakers are very intrigued by this. It's one of the issues that my colleagues, Chad and Grace and I, that I'm sitting next to, are able to cut through partisan divides and geographic divides over agriculture. You see our cheese industry is branded along with France, Germany, I can't think of the third country, and then Wisconsin. What is your advice to us who are advocates trying to convince lawmakers how important this industry is at the state level? Will, you are an incredible spokesperson, and you're welcome anytime to come to the Capitol with us and talk about agriculture and others up there. But what can we do as kind of warriors trying to tell this story? Because it is not, lawmakers are great. We're not at a point where it's brown cows produce chocolate milk, but we are working to continue to keep those folks educated how important this massive industry is. So I'd love your suggestions. Thank you.
So Ginseng has a state marketing board by state order. It's the Ginseng Board of Wisconsin, and I'll give you the advice that I've given to them since I came back is you need to get out of your comfort zone and step into some of these markets. It's really hard, I get it. You know, I speak the language. I grew up here in Wisconsin, was born here in the States. It's easier for me to step into Chinatown. It's easier for me to go to China, Taiwan, some of the markets, whether it be with the governor or with any of our trade missions and DATCAP or WEDC that go over there. It's hard to leave the farm because you have responsibilities there. And those responsibilities are more important than, you know, maybe being an advocate for the industry or being an advocate for agriculture. But if you can't spread the word, and it's easy for me to say because we have to do the marketing, right? Our business started on the marketing side. My dad was a social worker for the state of Wisconsin, heard about ginseng, and then moved the family to Wausau to get into the industry. So we weren't farmers. He was a social worker. So he, unlike a lot of farms where someone works off the farm for government or whatever benefits, he actually went the reverse. He quit working for the state to come be a farmer. And so we understand that because we started on the retail side, we do the wholesale, we do the distribution, the export. We're vertically integrated now from farm to end, and so we have to do that. But if you can't get out in front of the customers, if you can't bring some of the customers, we always try to bring our customers and talk to the federal and the state legislators and introduce them at least and make those connections so they realize how important it is to not just agriculture, but also to things like tourism. Right? We have a dozen buyers, maybe more, every year that come into central Wisconsin and probably spend 5 to 10 nights sleeping in hotels and eating in restaurants. They're paying taxes. They're paying room occupancy taxes. They're doing all the things that we want our folks related to agriculture, and they're actually coming to the state of Wisconsin. So how do you get some of those people even to talk to folks to talk about agriculture? Because it is easy when you're a farmer to be humble about the stuff and not brag about it, but you have to get out into market and share those experiences because customers care. One of the main reasons why Wisconsin ginseng is still price premium, even though the prices are lower than they were before the trade war, it's still priced at premium prices. This stuff retails in China, even on our website, at $200+ a pound after processing. Those customers have money, and we all know money speaks. Doesn't matter if you're a legislator, doesn't matter if you're a consumer, doesn't matter if you're a farmer. That purchasing power and that ability to kind of translate that into economic benefit, because if you think about what would happen if $50 to $100 million of ginseng money didn't flow into basically Marathon County and the surrounding counties, that's a lot of money going into farm and agriculture and paying people and for equipment and inputs. We need that as a state economy. We need that as an industry. And so we got to get better at putting ourselves in those types of uncomfortable situations because I get it, it's totally hard.
Can I build on that? So, Sean, in my 35 plus years working in the work I do a lot of education for health professionals, young medical students, nursing students, maybe they're like medical residents, so they've got their medical degree, and I want to get them interested in rural practice, understanding the needs of farmers in their communities. So I would say in my 35 years, I've probably done 20 field trips where you take a group of 30 physicians or young medical students in a bus, and you might have one or two people who know anything about rural Wisconsin, or before that I was in Minnesota. And after they've spent 3 hours on a farm, they think they know the whole industry because they visited one or two farms, but when they see, feel, experience, have the opportunity to ask questions. And I think UW-Madison also does this pretty well. I think we still have is that right, Dean Gillespie? We have a Wisconsin Idea program and things. I think the more we can get people out, I do think, again, it's consistent with that relationship building, walking and putting on the biosecurity booties and going around and walking through the operation and being able to ask questions. To me, that turns people on. And rather than it being an abstract, something I pick up and look at that Census of Agriculture report, now it's real.
Right.
And you see it and you smell it and you can hear it and all those sorts of things.
Well, and Brian, that's back to your sustainability point. I mean, when you talk to dairy producers, their eyes glaze over because they feel like they've been told this over and over again. But to you, both Will and John's point, if you can step out and get past that gee shucks kind of thing and really tell your story, Wisconsin is unique in the stories that it can tell versus California, Arizona, Texas, all the rest that might be trying to get the sustainable label for Walmart, for McDonald's, for the other majors, correct?
Yeah, and digital technology is going to change that. So you may not actually need the farmer to step out of their comfort zone. What we may need to do is bring digital technology to the farmer.
Yeah.
So you've seen Ginseng Board of Wisconsin is doing some of this now. They're filming videos on farms with farmers in English, and then they're having someone subtitle them in Mandarin so that people overseas can hear directly from the farmer, because there's millions of customers who are not going to come to the U.S. to come in, but they still want to know about this product. So they're using social media and other channels to try to reach consumers. Some of our top selling stores in mainland China, not ours, but they're, they buy from our distributors. They're using basically the Chinese equivalent of TikTok to live stream the product. Live stream the product being unloaded from container ships, basically in boxes, bulk, and then packaged into individual packages for consumers, and they're selling them live, right? Ordering, almost like I was telling someone at dinner last night, home shopping network. If you remember what the home shopping network was like to a generation of people who didn't leave the house, this is what is happening on TikTok and other channels in China. Those folks aren't leaving the house. They're watching videos on their phone, and they're learning about products that they had no idea what they do, how they existed, or where they came from. And if you think about that type of eyeball and what that means in terms of a consumer demographic, as those consumers think, and as China remains still one of our major trading partners, the opportunities are no longer necessarily the physical aspect of it. It's literally learning about the product in a digital, and the way we did it when I was younger was obviously TV. But it's now through cell phones and cell phone technology. So using things like YouTube and other stuff, even if you Google my name, or you go onto YouTube, which is owned by Google, and search my name, you'll find that we have a series of videos about how we grow this, and tourism, and how we harvest it, and we process it, and it's me and others in our industry speaking about it to consumers so they understand better where the product comes from and why they should pay this premium price for it.
Any other questions that we're looking? Yep. Larry.
Primarily for Mr. Sue. Specialty crops have their challenges, as you well know. And with your ginseng, it takes around 4 years to get that mature crop. You're dealing with a specialized market. That Mother's Day storm you mentioned took out a great number of your producers. What would you like to see at the federal and state level to improve specialty crop insurance? And also, for those of us who don't know much about growing ginseng, please tell us a little bit about the crop rotation, because you can't just go back to that same field in a couple of years.
Yeah, so someone was talking about farmland. Because ginseng has an allelopathy similar to walnut, et cetera, it kind of makes the ground toxic to future generations of ginseng plants. So your yields, if the second time planting, are typically 25% or less if you plant a second time. So we actually move from field to field to field throughout the 5-county region around Marathon County, moving to different areas, although our family and our farms have only been in Marathon County for the last almost 50 years because we refuse to leave that area because the soil we feel it's different than some of the surrounding counties. So for specialty crops, I think we're unique, right? And that's why we always kind of wave the flag and say we're unique and we're different, but we face the same challenges as other agriculture. It's just that our challenges are slightly different than maybe more mainstream crops. We're smaller, so a small amount of dollars makes a much bigger difference. You know, what does $1 million do for the soybean industry? Probably nothing. What does $1 million do for the ginseng industry? That's like $1 a pound. And so it is pretty significant. So the benefit of being in a smaller industry is that you can do things that are more targeted and more specific towards our industry. You've seen USDA try to do that with kind of some of the MASC and TASC and other types of grants or, programs. But a lot of times our farmers don't apply for them because they've never had the ability to have access to these programs because they only farm specialty crops, or the payouts are so minimal that it doesn't pay for them to actually apply, given they're so small, they won't qualify for more than a few hundred or a few $1,000s. And so those are some of the unique challenges, even with things like crop insurance. You know, some of the premiums were lower for minorities or women or other farmers. That is great, but it doesn't really help because the issue isn't the ethnicity or the background or the gender of the farmer. The issue is literally the amount of capital it takes and the time it takes to get into this industry. So I think sometimes we try to address some of these problems with, ideas and solutions that aren't appropriate for specialty crops. But it's also so difficult, I understand, from the government standpoint, to sit here and try to administer a program that can address the needs of cranberry growers or maple syrup producers or ginseng producers, because we are so specialized and our needs are so specialty. And so I don't know how you bridge some of that. I think it's a really great question. I think it's something that we need to think about more as specialty crop producers to get our needs addressed, because part of it is processing, part of it is the time frame and the capital involved, and part of it is we're just not big enough to be able to really lobby without working with the farm bureaus and other large organizations, because we can't pay enough to folks to care about our industries given how small we are.
True. There's a lot of that. They got $1 billion. They're still holding $1 billion at USDA for specialty crops.
for
so
specialty crops. Still
we'll
holding
see if the voice is heard.
They'll see if they can figure it out.
Yeah. Well, I will flop over if they do. Anybody else? One more question before we take the break. Any final comments from the panel? I mean, we kind of sporadically jumped around just based on where the conversation fed, but we've got about 5 minutes if anybody's got some quick points. Points.
I actually want to add quickly on what Will was just talking about and the question about supporting some of those specialty crops.
Oh, yeah. That's your family.
It is. I'm not going to go at it. Pam is mentioning my family also runs about 700 acres that include fresh market fruits and vegetables, cash grain, and processing vegetables. That's my other life, my other hat. But as we talk about, the challenge of those programs, both for the department and agencies that are administering them, as well as for the grower in knowing how to access them, that's where I think some of our trade organizations, our service professionals play such a vital role in supporting those industries. As I was talking earlier about the federal and state protectionary programs that help to prop up farmers, I shouldn't even say prop up, but just ensure that they get paid in some of these situations. How often do we really think about those? In good years, probably not a whole lot. Milk producers, you probably get that notice in your milk check in June and toss it out until the year that it becomes important. And so it is vital that our ag service professionals and our trade organizations continue to think about the programs that maybe for us are 5, 10, 20 years old, they're old news. But for the farmer that's encountering that problem for the first time, it's a big deal. And I had mentioned, I do want to touch briefly on bankruptcy, and I know that everyone kind of cringes a little bit when I say that, right? Because bankruptcy at any level is not a topic that people like to talk about. But as we head into a financially challenging year, I want you all to know the message that when we think about bankruptcy doesn't have to be a dirty word. Our founders in this country put together the bankruptcy code as a means for a fresh start. Bankruptcy does not mean quitting. It does not mean giving up. It does not mean that someone failed. There are a variety of chapters, yes, for liquidation, but also for reorganization. And again, the reason I'm taking just 30 seconds to throw that out there for all of you is if we are going to head into this era with some tighter margins again and a little bit less cash flow, not every farm is going to experience the same economy the same way. And so it is important to know both where those producer security funds are, those trust opportunities are, but also recognizing that there is a lever specifically built in to give folks a fresh start if that is what they need. And again, really highlighting that for all of our ag service professionals and trade organizations, just helping farmers in these situations be aware that options exist is so incredibly impactful because they're not dealing with it every day. You might see it in your career 5, 10, 15 times. If they're dealing with it, it's probably only once or twice.
Go ahead, John.
Can I make two quickie
Go ahead.
comments?
I know
So
you've
we've
been waiting for
mentioned
it.
the Farm Center so many times today. Phone number is 800-942-2474. And I'm happy, I do have my little infographic I've been cheat sheeting off of. I've got an extra couple of these if anybody wants it. The other thing, suicide, we usually didn't, back in the day, we didn't talk about suicide. We talk about it now. We need to. Suicide is preventable. There is a suicide prevention hotline you can call or you can text. It's simple now. It's just 988, and it's not scary. I've called it before just to basically find out what happens, and I would encourage you to put that in your phone. I've had to have a number of conversations over my last roughly 10 years with producers The other thing I want to just acknowledge, like we have a lot of people here in the audience who are agriculture. I'm going to call you agricultural service providers and professionals. And I know that the stuff we're talking about is not just farmers. I used to go out and do lots of talks with FSA offices, and they're like, yeah, we need to be able to recognize the signs and symptoms of stress with farmers, but like, man, we're dealing with it big time. So just know that within Extension and also the College of Ag and Life Sciences, there are resources, there are programs, there are like multifaceted things that are available that we can help with conversations and training and things like active listening and recognizing some of these things. So I just wanted to put that little plug in.
No, very well received, John. Appreciate that. Now, remember, the objective here is obviously to remind you about resources you might have otherwise been overlooking. Paul kind of charged us when we were coming together this year. What is Wisconsin's ace in the hole? What do we have to offer that's unique, that we sometimes don't think about, that we're not tapping into as much as we might need to or want to? I think you've got a pretty good smattering of some of those kinds of elements with our panels today. We're going to take a quick break, a half hour or so that you can graze a little bit, get another cup of whatever, restroom, or more importantly, engage with our panelists that are up here that have a wealth of information they'd love to continue to share with you, but we're just out of time. So let's take a 30-minute break. Give them a round of applause. We'll be back here at 3 o'clock. 3 o'clock.